y'all, my name's Alicia and today I'm going to be covering the top 10 YA fantasy series of all time. So I'm not going to waste any time, let's just get into it. These are ranked from 1 to 10 in my favorites, number 1 being my favorite. So let's just start off with the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare. This series was phenomenal. I think it had a lot better character development than the Mortal Instruments series and a lot better relationships, because Jem and Tessa and Will have the greatest love triangle that I've ever seen, because it is actually a triangle. A lot of other YA love triangles are not actually triangles because it's just two boys liking the same girl, but in this book you can tell that Will and Jem love each other just as much as they love Tessa, and Tessa also loves them both equally, and I love it so much, and that is why I enjoyed the series so much. Now, because I only have 10 slots on this list, this is the only Cassandra Clare series I will be including, but the Mortal Instruments and Cassie's other series are still very enjoyable series, and they should make this list, but I'm just going to group all of Cassandra Clare's series in with the first one, The Infernal Devices. The second book on my list is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This series was so entertaining, and yes, you can't deny that it is very problematic. The representation is very poor. You can tell that she did try to remedy this in the later books, but ultimately I think it made it worse just because she was kind of veering into tokenism and including it for the sake of including it instead of actually doing the representation justice. So I do hope that she continues to improve this in her future writing. And yeah, I just can't deny that this book was so entertaining. It is popular for a reason, and it is number 2 on my top 10 favorite YA fantasy books. The third series on my list is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This book is a classic YA dystopian. It's so good. It kind of kicked off the YA genre back in the early 2010s, and it's just so nostalgic. It brings back so many memories, and I think just the plot and the way that Suzanne Collins writes it is so well done and says a lot about the society that we live in. And I have reread the series multiple times, and I will continue to do so in the future. The fourth book on my list is ACOTAR by Sarah J. Maas. This series maybe shouldn't be on the list because I only gave Cassandra Clare one spot, but I'm going to justify it because Cassandra Clare's books are all within the Shadowhunter Chronicles, whereas Sarah J. Maas has these 2 separate series. And again, this series is problematic, I'm not going to deny it. There is a whole slew of issues in them, but it is very entertaining. The second book is the reason this series is even on the list. If it were just up to the first and third one, it probably would not be on the top 10 series of all time for me, but because the second book was just so good and the writing was so good, the character development in the second book was so good, so yes, the ACOTAR series is on my list. The fifth series on my list is the Harry Potter series. So I have the first one here, which is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I started these books when I was in 2nd grade, and I've read them all multiple times. It's such a good series.
And again, I think Sarah J. Maas. Why do I keep saying Sarah J. Maas for all of the authors? She's just in my head, I don't know why, but
J.K. Rowling does such a good job of making this world so reflective of our own. Everything from the political systems to the relationships to everything. It's so good and magical, and everyone has read this series, I feel like, on BookTube, but this is definitely on my top 10 list of all time. Technically, this is a children's series, but I wanted to include it in the YA list just because I think so many YA readers have read it, as well as the fact that Harry does actually reach young adult age in the series, even though he starts off at 11. The 6th series on my list is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. The series was so suspenseful, so good. I just wanted to keep reading it, and waiting a year in between books was so hard. So yes, this is a trilogy if you have not read it, and I would highly recommend it if you're into fantasy, anything with fairies. The main characters are twins, which again, I didn't really like their dynamic, but it was a very interesting read, and I recommend this series. The 7th series on my list is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This cover is gorgeous, even though it is quite shiny and reflective. The lights are going crazy. But it is so good, and the writing is so lyrical and so beautiful, and it is only a duology, it's only 2 books. I do like this series slightly better than her other series, Daughter of Smoke and Bone, just because I thought her writing was improved, and I really enjoyed the characters in this series a lot. Laszlo and Sarai. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but yes, I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it. It is high fantasy, so if you're more into urban fantasy or kind of not as higher up fantasy, I don't want to call it lower fantasy because I've never heard that term before, but yes, if you're into high fantasy, I highly recommend this series. The 8th series on my list is the Vampire Academy series by Richelle Mead. I absolutely love these books. I read them almost a decade ago, back in like the vampire craze of YA, but I did really enjoy them. I read them multiple times, and I just remember them being so engaging and entertaining. They were never boring, and the story was actually so complex and original, and I really enjoyed it. So I had to add it on this list just because there is this series and there is also the spin-off Bloodlines, which I also really enjoyed with Sydney and Adrian, their characters and their kind of illegal relationship, because one, of course, is an alchemist and one is a vampire, and it is just so good. So I highly recommend this series as well as the spin-off series Bloodlines. The 9th series on my list is the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. These books were so fun and original. If you don't know what they are, the books in the series, there are 4 of them, and each one is kind of a retelling of a different fairy tale. It is a very loose retelling, so the first one, as you can probably guess, is Cinderella, and Cinder is a cyborg, and it's kind of a futuristic society where there are people from the moon, and there's a queen that lives on the moon that is the main villain, and it is just so much fun. I won't give that much more away just because, again, the rest of the series expands a lot from the first book, so if you haven't read the first book, start with that, and it is just so good. I hope you enjoy it. And my 10th series, I might get a lot of hate for, and it probably does not belong on a top 10 best fantasy series of all time, but I had to include it just because of the impact it had on the YA industry and how much I absolutely loved it and binged it and reread it over and over and over, and that is Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. This book is not that well written. The story isn't that good. I feel like any other author could have taken the same concept and written a much better story, one that wasn't so toxic and not good, but for whatever reason, this book was so popular, and I won't deny that I absolutely loved it when I read it. That was when I was 12. That was over a decade ago. But I absolutely love this book, and I will reread it probably in the future. If you're looking to read one of the most popular fantasy series ever in the history of YA, you should start with Twilight. I'm sure you've heard all about it, so I'm not even going to give a recap. But yeah, this is on my list. Don't come for me because I know it is nowhere near the best YA fantasy series, and there's a lot of honorable mentions that should and do go before this book. A couple honorable mentions for me go to the Nightshade series by Andrea Kramer, as well as the Poison Study series by Marie Schneider. The reason that these didn't make my list is because they're not epic fantasy books. Like, they're not the best writing, they're not the best books I've ever read, but I remember they really shaped YA for me in high school. I absolutely loved them, and they are what got me to continue with the YA genre. So those are my honorable mentions. This list is solely for the YA books that have entirely published series. There's no more coming out, and these are all series that I have personally read. So if your favorite series or a really popular series isn't on this list, it's probably because I have not read it yet. That is it for today. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my relatively new channel, and if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and subscribe, and I will see you next time with another video. Thanks guys, bye!